Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to Fired Up. It's great to see you. Today, we're going to be talking about how to align your team to maximize your AI search impact. And to discuss that, I am joined by Nicole Pytel.
Hey, Morgan. Hey, everybody.
And by Chris Ulbrich.
Hey, Morgan. Good to be here.
So we're going to dive in today to talk a little bit about GEO, Generative Engine Optimization. And this is a team sport. And so we thought we would talk a little bit about who's on that team and how do you get everybody sort of on the same page so that you can improve your rankings in AI search. And so we just thought we'd go through, talk a little bit about what is GEO, and then let's talk about the different citation sources for the LLMs and who can sort of move the needle on all of those. So at the top here, Nicole, when we say improving rankings in AI search and we talk about GEO, just give us a recap of what GEO is.
Yeah, I mean, it's really trying to optimize your content and your brand so that it shows up in those AI answers, whether it's Google's AI overviews, whether it's ChatGPT's outputs or Perplexity or Gemini or any of those. This has become just kind of the wild, wild west of AI trying to optimize, but it is very much something that more and more brands are doing and have to do because of the behavior. Everybody is shifting more a little bit to AI. Obviously, Google search is still very much a thing, but as AI search grows, brands have to make sure that they show up there early and often.
Right. I mean, you're starting to hear references to a near future that people are calling Google Zero, where you're going to see effectively no click-throughs from Google because everyone is getting their questions answered either through Google's AI summaries or through some LLM search that they're using, whether it's ChatGPT or another one.
Right. And one of the issues here is who owns AI search? I mean, we are seeing mandates come down from the board level. Right. We need to be visible in AI search. This is a problem. Whose desk does that land on? I would imagine it lands on the CMO's desk. It feels like it's part of marketing, but who's going to actually work out the strategy and then coordinate the teams to make this work? And so that's what we want to unpack a little bit, because it does involve the following teams, the PR team, the content team, obviously the SEO team, the affiliate marketing team. GEO touches on all those teams because of the citation sources. But I think your average PR team may not be that familiar with SEO or GEO even, Chris.
That's right. I mean, at an integrated agency like ours, it's in the air, and we're always working with the marketing teams so that the people who are mainly involved in media outreach have at least some base level awareness. And of course, our copywriters are trained on incorporating SEO keywords into press releases and blog posts and that sort of thing. And of course, the media team is at least basically familiar with the concept, but everybody is at sea, whether you're on the digital side or the marketing side or the media side. Everyone's trying to figure out the best practices for GEO now. So there's a sort of leveling effect involved. But one of the things that I think is emerging pretty clearly in these early days is that PR, media outreach, has more of a role to play in GEO than it probably did with SEO, because SEO was so dependent on owned content. And one of the observations people will make about GEO is that AI search, when it's pulling from sources, it does tend to favor journalistic sources. So that suggests that by engaging with the media and getting your messages out in the media, you are more likely to see those messages reflected in the output of AI search than you might have been under a purely SEO'd model.
Yeah, and there's this much cited muckrack report that says 27% of LLM citations come from journalistic sources. And that goes up if you include sort of recency. So what are the recent developments in this? Then I think it goes up by another 20% or something, because obviously the news, it then fans out across the web and finds news articles that it then synthesizes and puts into those responses. And so PR is having a moment around helping with this. It's true to say that one of the disciplines of SEO for off-page has been what's called sort of digital PR, which most sort of classic comms people wouldn't really associate with PR, but it effectively has meant sort of guest posting. And it's a bit like sort of a link building strategy. So sort of there has been this sort of digital PR element to SEO, but here we're really engaging the comms team to get editorial placements in the right places to help with AI search. And that's a real change. So how do you, number one, PR teams need to get up to speed with what is GEO and how does it work? The good news is that's a new discipline, and no one has got decades of experience in that. But the bad news is it's probably not day to day something the regular comms person is tracking, and so it's new homework.
That's a great point, because I feel like maybe some PR folks might be a little scared or feeling a little insecure. They're kind of dipping their toe into some cold water that feels very uncomfortable. They're not quite sure how to navigate it. But the sooner you get started, especially on the PR side, if PR folks are a little late to the game on the GEO front, even with some limited knowledge today, you're ahead of the curve. So even just getting started, even if you're taking super baby steps, you're probably taking more steps than the average PR team.
Right. And so I would say it's probably going to be the SEO manager who is running this, because we see GEO as an extension of SEO. And when it comes to your owned content, your own site, optimizing your site for SEO, many of the practices for GEO at the moment overlap. You've got to have a fast site. It's got to load quickly. It's got to be easy to navigate. It's got to have the right HTML markup. The metadata has got to all be there. Those things that you normally do in SEO will apply here. And SEO content creation has been the engine room for a lot of those programs anyway. And so 11% of citations are owned content. But here, obviously, you're going to want to align with the content marketing team, because you are not just creating SEO optimized content, anchor pages and glossaries, etc. It's also pulling from the blog and other pages on your site. So that's the content team's role, right, Nicole?
It absolutely is. And we sat down with our digital team and said, okay, you guys are doing all the research on this. What do we need to do from a content marketing perspective with content that we're creating? It's not as simple as just inserting some keywords like SEO is. There's different techniques and FAQs at the end of blog posts, or little TLDR bullets at the beginning, or maybe a before you go, remember these 3 things. The LLMs really like that structure of content, and it's not a huge lift to add to, say, a blog post that you're working on, but it's something that you have to be mindful of, and it's something that can make a big impact if done correctly. And you can literally ask ChatGPT, hey, give me 3 FAQs based on this blog post that people are most likely to ask you. What are people going to ask you? Because the LLMs, they love question and answers. They love little lists. They love things that just already have kind of that snippetability, for lack of a better term. And so, that adds to the content marketing strategy, even if it just means adding those things to a blog post, or maybe giving some extra thought to some of the H2s on the page or something like that, just to make it easier for those LLMs to scan and really understand what you're talking about, and making it easy for them to cite those back in response to a query.
Right. So where do you start with this initiative? We want to raise our awareness, our visibility in AI search. The logical best place is to benchmark where are we at the moment. And that has been pretty difficult I'd say. There's obviously been a big rush of new startups here. I'm thinking about Profound that just closed their Series B. There's Bluefish. There's one called Otterly. There's a bunch of others, new companies. And then there are the search tools. SEMrush, SEMrush has an enterprise AIO report. I think Ahrefs has got one too. Whatever the tool is, you got to kind of work out, where am I showing up?
I feel like that's worth digging into a bit because to me, one of the biggest differences between SEO and GEO is the variability of the responses with GEO, where, I mean, again, I'm not an SEO expert, and I do understand that you have to account for personalization with SEO, and it's not quite as simple as knowing that every time a particular query is entered, you get back these 10 search results. But it's more like that than with GEO. You can come up with a report and say, for these 20 key search terms of ours, we rank in the top 10 X percent of times, and we rank in the top 5 Y percent of times our content does. I feel like that's a lot harder to figure out with GEO. In part, it seems to me that the input, like even figuring out what you're trying to test for, is harder because if you're a vector database, you're going to want your content appearing on the query vector database in a search engine, right? But I doubt that many people are using AI that way. I don't think they're typing in vector database, right? They're going to be asking a question about vector database, and the content of that question might vary a bit. And then there's also a sort of built-in randomness within LLMs so that you're not even likely to get the same answer within 20, 30 degrees of similarity. If you ask the same question twice, you'll get different answers. So this is just all to say, like, I'm really thinking a lot about how you even start this exercise.
And, the companies behind these LLMs are just not as forthcoming with data as Google is. Google will tell you, you got this many impressions, you're showing up for these keywords, this is where you rank, this is where you ranked last month, this is where your competitors rank. Like, there's a lot of information that Google themselves will give you, whereas the open AIs of the world, they don't tell you that. They aren't going to tell you where you showed up or how many times or for what queries. There's very much this giant blind spot. And I think that's what scares people about GEO is there's so many unknowns and you can't just go to the source. And I think to Morgan's point, that's why you're seeing these companies show up and these tools, because people are just trying to grasp it. Like, how do I benchmark myself? Where are we showing up? Like, what little tidbit can I get that helps me kind of come up with some kind of strategy to build on?
Right. I mean, the term benchmark is misleading because the way that most of these tools work is you'll have to come up with a set of prompts that you routinely ask the LLMs via their API. You keep asking them and you gather up the prompt responses and you analyze the responses. Then you run the same prompts again and you compare the difference. And so how do you get those prompts? You probably take the keywords that you have for SEO and then you generate some synthetic prompts from that. There's 100, there's 200, there's 300 of them. And then you run that past Perplexity or ChatGPT via their APIs, and you take a sort of snapshot at that moment in time, and then you do it again, and you look at the difference.
I think that's worth saying more about. Like, what do you mean generate synthetic prompts?
Well, if you're optimizing your website for SEO, you have a list of keywords that tie to user intent, right? We want to show up with these keywords. That's a starting point. And you might have thousands of these, right? But you can't just put in, to your example, vector database into the LLM and then just keep checking against that. You've got to come up with what is a vector database? What are the leading vendors of vector database, etc. So you could manually work those questions out. Or you could ask, ChatGPT, what kind of questions should I have based on these keywords? And so they're called synthetic prompts. They're not real because there's hundreds of them, right? But to fast track that process, you come up with them based on your keywords. and then you review them and you go, okay, this is the set. Because obviously it costs money in tokens every time you ask, which is different than looking on Google Search Console. It costs you nothing to keep looking at that data. So there is a cost to sort of taking that snapshot, and that will impact the frequency with which you do that. So you come up with these synthetic prompts, and we like to have, as many as possible, 300. A lot of the tools will only have 100. And actually, incidentally, that's why when you go to these tools, it's kind of hard to sort of get a snapshot of where you currently stand for free because it costs some money. HubSpot's just launched a little AIO grader, which is pretty good, but it won't give you big depth. But that's how they're working. They're coming up with these synthetic prompts, and then they are analyzing the responses. And the prompts will vary whether web search is enabled or not. Some users have that, some users do not. And what we don't know is whether when I put in the question and you put in the same question, do we both get the same answer? Or do you get one answer and I get a different answer? Because it's probabilistic, but it's also based on all of our prior questions, our profile, far more than search. I know you said, look, search adapts with your personalization, but I think LLM queries adapt far more. And so these benchmarks, plus when Google makes a change to its algorithm, it publishes, we've changed everything, it's Panda and at this point, and then everyone's sort of going, okay, something changed in the algorithm and we won't know exactly what that is, but we know when it happened. Anthropic doesn't need to tell you when it changes its weights in Claude. And so, maybe it's valuing a certain type of source, journalistic sources, more than others. Maybe it's weighting Wikipedia more or Reddit more today than it did before because it's cheaper to crawl. So we're dealing with, as Nicole said, a situation where the data is opaque and where actually, they could have their thumb on the scale all the time. The scales could be changing. And so it's very difficult to get a benchmark. But you need to do something, right? You need to take a snapshot across all the different LLMs and then do it again and see what's changed, because you've got to start somewhere. And I think best practices will evolve here. The LLMs need to be more disciplined about when they change their weights, because otherwise, how do we know what to do on whether they're working? So I think this is a big problem. Another problem that I came across the other day is prompt caching. So if I'm ChatGPT, I don't want to be running the inference against every query each time if those questions are similar. So it caches them, so that when people are asking who's the president, they don't need to keep querying that it doesn't cost them as much money. And so they cache the answers. Now, how often do they update those caches? How broad are the prompts that it says, oh, I'll just spit out this same answer?
But now in theory, shouldn't caching make the output more predictable rather than less if the system is more mechanically delivering the same answer to recognizably the same question? For marketers, you would think that would be good news.
It could be good news or bad news, because if you didn't make it into the cache, how do you know when they're going to run another cache? So how do you know if that optimization worked? Did it not work? Have they just not cached it again lately? So it could be really good news if you're in the cache, but if you're not, then
no,
you're playing
right.
catch
You're
up.
right. I meant from the standpoint of just knowing where, just for analysis purposes, it's so hard to even know where you stand with AI search. It would seem that caching would help with that, but you're right, from the standpoint of trying to influence the outcome, then caching could really be an obstacle, as you say, depending on how often the cache is refreshed. Morgan, I know that some software developers, like database developers, have come up with caching technology for RAG applications at the enterprise level, with the idea that the enterprise will save money not running the same query over and over again if it's a common query, but from their employees. But do you get the sense that the caching is done on a global level by the LLM or on a per user level?
I wish I could tell you. I don't know enough about this particular topic, about how they work or how similar they are. We're running our synthetic prompts which we're going to have small differences between them. Does the cache then say, oh, these two prompts are very similar? I'll just spit out my canned answer to those. And that might mean that in my analysis, I'm thinking my brand is being referenced far more than it actually is. And hey, how often should I run these queries? If I'm getting these canned responses, it's going to look like nothing's changing. I'm just getting flatline. I'm doing all these optimizations and I'm just getting a flat line. Look, this topic is obviously a live one and I think is a real problem. But I think for our sort of, listeners out there, we'll have another episode about this with a data engineer who we've been working with to build our own tools. But I think it's an evolving space. But you need to do some kind of benchmark, take it with a grain of salt. But I think the important thing is to look at, from an actionable perspective, where are our citation sources? And then, i.e., where are the LLMs picking up references to our brand? And what does that mean for our strategy and then the teams? And so, if you know the sources, you can then take action.
Yeah, I mean, and presumably your competitors' brands
Correct.
and your sector. You want to know what sources, and this is where PR comes in, because it would be PR's job, the comms team's job, to secure coverage in those favored publications. This is all assuming that favored publications exist, but from the research I've done, it does seem as though, a particular LLM will favor a particular set of publications on a particular topic. Also, if we're going down the rabbit hole on this, it's probably worth pointing out that in the background, these LLMs are almost certainly relying on some kind of web search product, whether that's Google or Bing or some obscure search engine. And so the preferences of that search engine are going to factor in as well. But it's very obscure how that happens. There's reason to think that the results that an LLM gets from Bing are not on a particular query are not necessarily the same ones you would get if you entered it in through the user interface. And that's because the LLM is using an API that will return results in a different order than the human user interface would. And so it's all very complicated, but just to note, there's that other level of influence there. But beyond whatever preferences or weights or heuristics the LLM might be applying, there's probably something going on at the search engine level as well.
Yeah. And in fact, they're not actually search engines. They use a process called query fan out, which they're running of their own multiple prompts, searching out on the web, then sort of synthesizing the results to give you your answer. And so they're sort of looking for commonality there. And that's different than an indexed outcome from a search crawl or a search index. So again, still, people are still understanding a little bit more about that, how that works. But you're going to see in that list of citations a number of publications. So that's a PR opportunity. And you're going to see quite at the moment, you'll see actually a lot of sort of listicles from competitors saying these are the top 10 vector database companies, and they have their own little pros and cons, which are published by your competitors. So your competitors are shaping the perception of ChatGPT or Claude about your brand by publishing content on their own site. I mean, Nicole, this is obviously a content opportunity. I don't know how long this is going to last, but this is one for the content team.
It totally is. And I think we've made this point before. The content team, you've got to create the content, because if the LLMs aren't pulling it from you, they're going to pull it from your competitors. And as far as those listicle goes, we see them. What are the top 10 finance platforms? What are the top 10, all of these things. Will that last forever? Probably not. My guess is the LLMs are going to take kind of a Google-like approach to people that they think might be trying to game the system that way, kind of like what we saw with keyword stuffing and that kind of thing. For right now, it works, and we see that pop up a lot. So, hey, ride the wave while you can. I don't think it's going to be a technique that lasts forever, but I think, from a deeper content marketing perspective, you're going to see not just outlets that are being sourced, you're going to see topics that are being sourced. And if you are a fintech and you see that your competitors are showing up for all kinds of things related to accounting and you're not, well, you better start cranking out some accounting content if you want to show up in those results as well. So it's a good way to kind of do almost like a little mini AI audit of, well, where are we compared to our competitors? Where are we doing better? And then where are those gaps that we need to fill? And then your content team better get on it.
That's right. So the content team needs to work closely with the SEO and GEO team or as part of that team. And I think content marketing and the SEO team are already sort of joined to the hip. So this is an extension of that. But a new team is the PR team. But, Chris, OpenAI has publishing agreements with News Corp, The Atlantic, Vox Media, AP, Axel Springer, Financial. Like, they're scraping some of it, adversarially and being sued by some of them, but they also have publishing deals.
That's right. They've made agreements with a lot of these publications to gather data, to gather articles from behind the paywall. I think that's the key. I mean, if anyone who's played around with an LLM and tried to use it to do web research, has quickly run into the problem of the LLM not being able to access information behind a paywall. And for certain kinds of queries, that can be like a decisive obstacle. Now you see, as you say, there's a whole constellation of publishing organizations that have struck deals to allow organizations like OpenAI in to access their journalism. And that's a new revenue stream for them. And it makes up, hopefully, to a large extent. I mean, as someone who always likes to see journalism, I can only hope that this makes up and then some for the loss in click-through that will inevitably, result from AI search. If people aren't clicking through to The Atlantic and,
Yeah.
and a small number of them subscribing, that at least The Atlantic's getting paid. So that's all good. I think it's, from a PR strategy perspective, it would be easy to say, well, that means you should try to get your content on The Atlantic. I think it is fair to say that if your goal is to show up in AI search, it's better to have your content on an outlet that is actively working with, say, OpenAI than one that is actively fighting it in court and keeping its crawlers out, because that content truly will not appear. But I think the number of publications that are actively fighting in court is relatively small. And from a practical point of view, the PR team definitely needs to be aware of what publications have business arrangements with which LLMs. But from a practical point of view, I think it's probably like a 10% shift in strategy. Most of the time, like very few PRs are going to turn down a New York Times story because
No,
it's not going to
keep the
show
main
up.
goal the main goal, right?
Yeah,
But do input to the media list. Look at those citations and input them to the media list if you've got a choice. So there might be other areas that you want to sort of add in terms of targeting.
Typically, when we're communicating with clients about the publications that we'd like to approach for a story, we give them the pros and cons for doing the outreach in the order we're suggesting. And clearly, it's a pro if a publication has a relationship with ChatGPT or OpenAI. It's not necessarily the decisive factor, but it's a point in favor.
Two other areas that PR needs to align with GEO are influencer marketing and social media community management. So that's three areas. And, a third of citations, according to MarkRec, come from third parties. That's competitors, but it's also influencers. It's also analysts. So getting that stuff published, their content published, is going to reach their audiences, but it's also going to have a double whammy of being cited. And so I think thinking about, as you're selecting the influencers, how much content do they publish? Do they publish it outside a paywall that's accessible on the open web is important. And, that might say, hey, I don't want to publish it on my own site. Publishing it on their site is important because I've already got content on my site. The other part of this I think is interesting is Reddit. Reddit and Quora and these Q&A sites are often cited, Wikipedia too. And, I think sort of tangential for PR to sort of manage those communities, but how your brand shows up around which topics is now important for GEO. So somebody needs to own them. And it's easy to find the keywords or brand mentions or competitor mentions. You can use tools like TalkWalker, there's one called kwatch.io, to kind of surface those. But then you can't just wade in and start commenting or blasting your corporate materials into that subreddit, because you'll soon get hosed. And there are, even some AI tools that will automatically post stuff into a subreddit.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
So again, the GEO team can surface those opportunities, but then you might want to have your evangelist go in there and start taking Reddit seriously to sort of build your credibility there. So I think that's another important part of this. And just to sort of round out here, paid media is 2%. You'll often see these are sort of affiliate sites, Get Cited, that are doing sort of paid reviews and paid roundups. Those things are important. And also whoever manages your G2, Capterra, Peer Insights reviews. Yes, it's important to have the reviews. Those get crawled. But those sites also publish roundups editorially. So those ones get cited, the companies with the best reviews, the fastest moving, the hottest one. So again, an SEO person's not going to be normally looking at that. PR person, sometimes I've seen that ladder up into PR, but that's had extra importance and you get extra value for that now as part of the GEO effort. So this is very much a team sport, as we said, and it's going to be new for all of those teams, but get them all together in a room and work out the responsibilities, because this is unless you all work together on these different citation sources, it can't just be the content and the SEO team optimizing for your own property, because it's only 11% of citations. You're not going to get there. You need affiliate, you need influence, third-party influencer stuff. You need PR team involved in that conversation as well. All right, this is an evolving topic. I think it's a super exciting one that we're all learning a lot about. And as we just covered today, we'll be revisiting it again on the measurement side, but no doubt on some more of these best practices. Chris, Nicole, thanks for joining me to talk about that. And thank you all for tuning in. And we will see you all again next week.